What happens when we die? For centuries, billions of people have turned to the Bible for answers. But what if I told you that the Bible we read today is missing crucial pieces of the puzzle? What if ancient peoples, including early followers of Jesus, believed things about the afterlife that were deliberately removed, suppressed, or simply lost to time? Today, we're going on a journey into the shadows of religious history. We're going to explore what ancient texts that didn't make it into the Bible have to say about life after death. We'll uncover beliefs that were once mainstream but are now forgotten. And we'll ask the question, why were these ideas left out? This isn't about what you should or shouldn't believe. This is about understanding what our ancestors thought about the greatest mystery of all, and why some of those thoughts were deemed too dangerous to survive. Let's begin.
First, let's talk about what the mainstream Bible actually tells us about the afterlife, because it's less clear than most people think. If you ask the average person what happens after death according to the Bible, they'll probably say good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. But here's the thing. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, barely mentions this concept at all. Instead, it talks about Sheol, a shadowy underworld where all the dead go, regardless of whether they were righteous or wicked. It's not a place of punishment or reward, it's just a place. Dark, quiet, where souls exist in a kind of semi-conscious state. Think of it less like Dante's Inferno and more like the Greek underworld, Hades. King David, the psalmist, even says in Psalm 6, "For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise?" It's not exactly the pearly gates we've been promised. The concept of heaven and hell as we know them, that develops much later, and it's heavily influenced by ideas from other cultures, Greek philosophy, Persian Zoroastrianism, and yes, texts that were eventually excluded from the Bible. So what were these excluded texts, and what did they say about life after death?
Let's talk about the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. These are collections of ancient Jewish and early Christian writings that were widely read and respected in their time, but didn't make it into the final biblical canon. The Book of Enoch is perhaps the most famous. Written sometime between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, it was hugely influential in early Judaism and Christianity. The New Testament even references it. Yet it was excluded from most biblical canons, except in the Ethiopic Orthodox Church, where it remains scripture to this day. What does Enoch say about the afterlife? It describes multiple levels of heaven and hell, a detailed geography of the afterlife with specific places for different types of souls. It talks about fallen angels, the Watchers, who taught humanity forbidden knowledge. It describes a final judgment where souls are weighed and sorted, with the righteous ascending to live with God and the wicked cast into eternal fire. Sound familiar? That's because these ideas heavily influenced later Christian theology, even though the book itself was left out. Then there's 2 Esdras, also called 4 Esdras. This apocalyptic text, probably written after 70 CE, contains vivid visions of the afterlife. It describes souls being stored in chambers after death, waiting for the final judgment. Some souls are in peace, others in torment, depending on their deeds in life. But here's where it gets interesting. The text also suggests that only a few, a tiny remnant, will actually be saved. The author, writing as Ezra, even argues with God about this, saying, "What good is it that we were promised an imperishable world if we have done deeds that bring death?" It's a surprisingly pessimistic view, and one that didn't sit well with later church authorities, who emphasized God's mercy. The Apocalypse of Peter, written around 135 CE, was considered scripture by many early Christians. It contains one of the earliest and most graphic descriptions of hell, with specific punishments for specific sins. Blasphemers hung by their tongues over eternal fire. Women who adorned themselves to seduce men hung by their hair over boiling mire. It's a horrifying medieval imagery, except it predates the medieval period by 1,000 years. Why was this excluded? Partly because of debates over authenticity, but also because its view of hell was perhaps too harsh, too final for the developing doctrine of the Church. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Most people think of reincarnation as an Eastern concept, Hinduism, Buddhism, something foreign to Western religion. But there's evidence that some early Christians and Jews before them believed in it too. The concept of Gilgul in Jewish mysticism, the transmigration of souls, has ancient roots. While it's most associated with Kabbalah from the medieval period, some scholars trace similar ideas back to ancient Jewish sects like the Pharisees. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, says the Pharisees believed that the souls of the wicked are punished eternally, but the souls of the good pass into other bodies. In early Christianity, Origen of Alexandria, one of the most influential theologians of the 3rd century, taught about the pre-existence of souls and their potential to inhabit multiple bodies over time. He didn't call it reincarnation exactly, but the concept was similar. Souls existed before birth and could undergo multiple incarnations as part of their spiritual journey toward God. Origen's ideas were hugely influential for centuries, but in 553 CE, at the Second Council of Constantinople, many of his teachings were declared heretical. Why? Because they threatened the Church's authority. If salvation is a process that could take multiple lifetimes, then the Church's role as the exclusive gatekeeper to heaven is undermined. The Gospel passages where Jesus seems to refer to John the Baptist as Elijah reincarnated, these were reinterpreted. The idea that you must be born again in John 3, spiritualized, not literalized. Whether or not these early Christians truly believed in reincarnation as we understand it today is debated, but the fact that the possibility was even on the table and then actively suppressed tells us that ancient views of the afterlife were far more diverse than we're usually taught.
If you really want to see alternative views of the afterlife that were excluded from Christianity, you need to look at the Gnostics. Discovered in 1945 near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, the Gnostic texts reveal a branch of early Christianity that was radically different from what became orthodoxy. And their view of life after death was perhaps their most radical departure. For the Gnostics, this material world is a prison. It was created not by the true God, but by a lesser, ignorant deity they called the demiurge. The human soul is a divine spark trapped in flesh, and the goal of existence is to escape this physical realm entirely. Death, then, is not something to fear, it's a potential liberation. But here's the catch. You need special knowledge, gnosis, to navigate the afterlife successfully. The Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic text from the 3rd or 4th century, describes the soul's journey after death through multiple spheres or realms, each guarded by archons, spiritual rulers who try to trap the soul and force it back into reincarnation. Only those with the secret passwords, the hidden knowledge, can pass these guardians and reach the true divine realm beyond. The Apocryphon of John describes multiple heavens with the material world at the bottom and the true, unknowable God far above. Salvation is about ascending through these levels, shedding the material
and embracing the purely spiritual. This is closer to Buddhist or Hindu concepts of moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, than to traditional Christian heaven and hell. The Church Fathers despised these teachings. They called the Gnostics heretics and worked tirelessly to suppress their texts. By the 4th century, most Gnostic writings had been destroyed. Only scattered references in anti-Gnostic polemics survived, until the Nag Hammadi discovery showed us what they actually believed. Why were these ideas so threatening? Because Gnosticism made salvation an individual, internal quest. You didn't need priests, sacraments, or the institutional church. You needed knowledge and spiritual awakening. That was unacceptable to an organization building its power structure.
So, we've seen all these different beliefs about the afterlife that existed in ancient times. The question is, why didn't they survive in the Bible? The answer is both simple and complex: canonization. The biblical canon, the official list of books considered scripture, wasn't decided by divine decree. It was decided by humans, by church councils, over centuries of debate, politics, and power struggles. Different Christian communities used different texts. The Ethiopian church kept Enoch. The early church in Rome circulated the Apocalypse of Peter. But as Christianity became more organized, more institutional, there was pressure to standardize. At councils like Nicaea in 325 CE, Hippo in 393 CE, and Carthage in 397 CE, church leaders argued about which books were truly inspired and which were not. The criteria? Apostolic origin, widespread use, and crucially, theological conformity. Books that contradicted emerging orthodoxy were out. Books that empowered individual spiritual experience over church authority were out. Books that presented too many questions, too much ambiguity, too much diversity of thought, out. It wasn't always a sinister conspiracy. Many church leaders genuinely believed they were preserving truth and protecting believers from confusion, but the result was the same: a narrowing of acceptable belief. And here's the thing: different Christian traditions made different choices. Catholics include books in their Old Testament that Protestants call Apocrypha. Eastern Orthodox churches have an even larger canon. The Bible isn't one book, it's a collection, and different communities have collected differently. What we read as the Bible today is the product of historical processes, human decisions, and cultural contexts. Understanding that doesn't diminish its spiritual value for believers, but it does remind us that there were always other voices, other visions, other possibilities.
So, what have we learned? Ancient people had incredibly diverse and sophisticated beliefs about life after death. Some believed in shadowy underworlds. Others believed in multiple heavens and hells. Some thought souls could inhabit multiple bodies across lifetimes. Others believed death was an escape from a false material world. These weren't fringe beliefs held by outcasts. These were mainstream ideas found in texts that were read in synagogues and churches that influenced some of the greatest thinkers in religious history. But they didn't fit the narrative that prevailed, so they were set aside, deemed secondary or actively suppressed. Does that mean the Bible is wrong or incomplete? That's for you to decide. But it does mean that the story of human spiritual seeking is richer, stranger, and more varied than any single book can contain. Our ancestors grappled with the mystery of death just as we do. They offered dozens of answers. Maybe the real wisdom is not in choosing one answer, but in appreciating the depth of the question. What do you think happens after we die? And what ancient wisdom speaks to you?